somewhere right now in a data center you will never visit. There may be already a simulation that might look like you. And it's not a photograph, it's not a medical record, but it's a computational model of a human being, a version of you that can be tested, stressed, treated, and analyzed without you ever being part of this equation. And this is not in another episode when I discuss portrayals of AI in books and movies in science fiction. Today, we will talk about what is real in AI technologies and their implementations. And we will look under the hood of how such models of human beings are built and used and what came next in AI, in medicine and healthcare. So welcome to AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie, an AI literacy podcast. I'm your host, Anastassia, founder and CEO of AI Edutainment, an AI literacy company. So today we are going somewhere that sits at the intersection of data science, biology, ethics, and the future of medicine. And my guest is Dr. Andrée Bates, and she is the chairwoman, founder, and CEO of Eularis, the leading AI consultancy firm in pharmaceutical industry and life sciences. Andrée is a neuroscientist by training, and she's a podcaster herself with over 220 episodes on artificial intelligence in pharma. And she has been making the case for digital twins, our topic today, as the future of clinical development long before digital twins became a boardroom-ready item. So, Andrée, welcome to my show. Welcome to AI Snacks. I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you. And we will record two parts because I would like to dedicate sufficient time to this topic. The first part should address the origin story of digital twins in medicine and pharmaceutical companies, the technology stack of digital twins, and how they started to get deployed. And then the second part would be on behalf of regulation, ethics, questions around personal data protection. And I would be very interested in your vision on digital twins and the future of AI in medicine, which is a much broader topic. You have your own opinion, and you interview so many leaders, so many entrepreneurs and executive scientists. So you might have some commonalities and themes and perspectives and some voices which might be critical of one or another aspect behind the topic. So welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. I love your show.
Thank you so much. I love yours. And Andrée, maybe could you just paint a big picture, starting with what is a digital twin? So I know this from, let's say, the factory floor. Yeah. So something which is being used in simulating machinery and remote maintenance of complex machines in industry. But digital twin in health, could you please elaborate on how this term emerged, who copied what from where, and who started to deploy those?
Sure. Well, as you said, you know, the first ones were the NASA ones in the 60s, but the most common use is that, you know, General Electric, I think, were the first in the 70s to do it for power plants. And then really where we come in is these models of humans, which really is a little bit more complex in many ways. So you've got this computational model, which is what was the original one. And then a digital twin is essentially a model that is bound to an entity and then updated with new data from that entity over time and then used to make decisions. So originally the entity was, you know, the NASA rockets and space station, then these big power plants, and then humans. So all of these have got these kind of three parts. There's like a physical reference, so the actual thing, and in medicine that's the human. A visual or a virtual, representation of that thing, and then a live data link because you want that updated data. So there are digital twins in healthcare, and there's things that are called digital twins in healthcare that aren't exactly digital twins. So a lot of things that the naming gets kind of confused a lot of the time. So many ways. I've seen people have a deep fake of themselves and say, meet my digital twin. That's not a digital twin. So a digital twin is like a digital replica of the processes. And a lot of things that people are calling digital twins in healthcare are really predictive models with good marketing. So, there's a lot of these QSAR toxicity models. That's not a twin. A population PK/PD model is useful, but not a twin. So really a twin is mimicking the processes. And so they really started with body organs. So we've got, I don't remember what the very first one was, but I think we've had like hearts and pancreases and things like that for a long time. So they're more body elements that are created in a twin. And if you go back to 2016, I remember the Medtronic, I think it was Medtronic, with the wearable glucose sensors. And so they collected data from lots of people with diabetes and then created these twins that they put into their sensors. But then there's like a little pinprick needle from that sensor going into the person it's attached to and constantly taking blood readings and simulating that person's metabolism in real time. So it's automatically calculating and adjusting the insulin delivery. So that people weren't calling that a digital twin, but it really was, because in everything but name, because it was based on modeling lots of people. Then it had a physical reference of one person that was the link of the, constantly updated. And then we've also probably about 6 or 7 years ago now started doing it in oncology as well. So really taking these broad patient models and then with thousands of patients and then basically bringing it down to individual patients. But it's more still very much system based. I feel like, it's interesting because with us, the way, if you think about Western medicine, so much still is very much, gastrointestinal or cardiac or whatever body part it is. But actually what we need for a full body digital twin is all of those bits combined, which is interesting. And that's the hard bit, of course.
I imagine, and just for my understanding, so in books, sometimes we operate with archetypes.
Yeah.
So if I say this person is Cassandra, so we
Yeah.
immediately know what is meant.
Yeah.
Because we kind of, rely to this Greek mythology and to history, and we understand, okay, this is how this person behaves.
Yeah.
So there is like this, let's say, meta heart or meta kidney sitting on a server. So it's not Anastassia sitting on a server or Andrée, but it's like a meta organ, but it depends on all other systems in the body and probably the environment. So those data did not descend upon us from Mars, but those are humans operating on planet or Earth.
Yeah.
So atmosphere, humidity, physical constraints, pollution, all kind of environmental factors, jobs, stress levels. So can I imagine this as like a meta ontologies dedicated to certain body parts plus the environment from bodies and, let's say, the general environment? Or do I get it wrong?
No, that's correct. Yes, exactly. And I think that the challenge is to get a full body digital twin, it's not really just piecing all the heart digital twin mixed with the brain digital twin mixed with all of these digital twins. It's finding how they interact together. And that's obviously more than an AI challenge. It's also engineering and physics, because we're dynamic systems as a body. So although we've got these beautiful heart digital twins and we've got parts of brain digital twins, we've got, all sorts of organ twins, we don't operate as a whole heap of parts. We somehow, which we're still figuring out in medicine, operate together and all those parts fit together. So that's kind of the complexity that's being worked on at the moment.
And I'm sometimes wondering, if you are in a lab and you receive a model, you might experiment with it, your heart desires, and life is messy.
Yeah.
And then out of sudden, what is the impact on a real patient or a cohort of patients? So that's a big question. And I know this from the industrial twins. So, of course, countless companies are claiming, so we are specialized in digital twins of machines and factories and the whole companies. But to my knowledge, I'm an AI realist. This is PR and marketing, like fully automated, digitized twins of companies don't exist.
No, they are still replacing parts. So when you look at the, the claims about it, that there's so many claims that I've read and got very excited about, we have no humans in, going to no humans. At the moment, it's replacing parts of humans. So we have, for example, the placebo arm is a digital twin, for example, or a synthetic control. So we still have human data in all of the phases. But when they're using these digital twins, they've got humans in the test arm and they've got the synthetic in the control arm usually. But that's really strong in rare disease because it's unethical to put people in a placebo arm in that when there's such a, like some of those rare diseases are really dangerous and there's so few patients, you don't want to be giving them a placebo if they could die if they don't have the real drug. So in those situations, these are really, really powerful. And there are obviously lots of these clinical trials going on now that do that. So yeah, the control in these trials is a digital cohort built from huge amount of data of people and registries and basically matching on with the patients that are in the other group on their covariates. So regulators now accept that as long as it's something that the company can prove that it's really well characterized and the matching is done very rigorously.
So that was a very important keyword. So clinical trials. So this is probably a very broad, very important category where such digital twins are getting utilized. And I would like to understand the economics behind, so the why, besides science, of course, and research.
Yeah.
But before we go there, could you please explain, so what are the steps if a pharmaceutical company, let's say a nuke theoretical company, wants to implement such a twin for, I don't know, brain or lung or heart? So what are the steps?
Like the technology fundamentals.
Yes.
Well, you pre-train the data of a lot of people on a model that's basically learning the joint distribution of how the patients are evolving, how the condition is on different people to create this kind of plausible future trajectory of how the person's body is going to respond. So the output isn't like a point estimate, it's more of a distribution over futures. So that's kind of why it's actually quite well suited to this uncertainty that we have. So the lineage basically runs from conditional latent variable and recurrent generative models through a neural ODE style, so an ordinary differential equation, continuous time formulation, and increasingly fused with more mechanic kind of prior things that are to do with engineering. So the key difference from a classical machine learning is that you're not classifying, you're simulating counterfactual time courses. So if you're doing a clinical grade digital twin, then you've got 4 properties. And this is often where things can fail. So firstly, you've got individuation. So, it's tied to a person or a participant rather than a cohort average. And then the second thing that you need is credibility evidence. So you need a formal verification and validation package, for regulators showing that the model is fit for a specific context of use. So the FDA, for example, have a framework for assessing the credibility of the computational modeling in medical device submissions. That's the touchstone. And that's what they're starting to apply to these other ones. But without that kind of verification and validation, it doesn't matter how good you think your model is, it's not going to get through regulation. And then we've also got the uncertainty quantification. So this is not just a point prediction, but a calibrated distribution. So say you're looking at diabetes, your HbA1c will be 7.2 is kind of useless. You really need to know what range it is. So you might be having 7.0 to 7.5, 90% credible interval, conditional on adherence above 80%. Then you're getting to the start of something actual clinical because you're building in changes that are happening. And then the fourth part of that is that you need a regulator-aligned analytical role. So the output enters through a pre-specified statistical analysis plan. So you've got this prognostic covariate adjustment, and that was formally qualified by the EMA for phase 2 and 3 trials with continuous outcomes. And the FDA has concurred that that's fine, that works with their current guidance. So that qualification, these four things are really what separates a science project from a clinical tool. And then the rest is really just engineering hygiene, provenance, monitoring, drift detection, audit trails. Boring, but exactly the difference between a research demo and something that you can put in an application to the FDA.
And Andrée, when did this technology start to emerge, let's say, from a theoretical construct to a practical tool to drive outcomes?
I think in about 2020. I mean, there's companies like Unlearn that have got it. There's quite a few good companies out there now, but I think 2020 when they started to use it in oncology, and then in 2022 was when the FDA approved it for clinical trials towards the end of 22. So I guess that's when it was really officially coming. It was kind of like the very beginning of the 2020 era.
It's very
when someone's listening.
No, it's very interesting because, I would have thought you would name some very large companies. I do not know, like Johnson & Johnson or Roche or Novartis, and you are naming important companies, but much smaller size. So how do they get their database to build something that important?
Well, the different companies have different approaches, but most of them are working with big pharma. So there are, biobanks and places that you can buy biological data, but I do see that most of them are working with big pharma companies and basically collaborating with them together.
And what is the economical rationale for?
Well, there's lots of good economical rationale if we can get it to work properly, which is, it's very interesting. There's so much going on in this space. So the economic rationale is if, it takes one of the longest things, clinical trials take years. And part of the problem and why it takes years often is patient recruitment. We actually did a project, I'm trying to remember when it was, quite a long time ago now. And it was for a cancer drug, and it was a third-line cancer drug, and it was for a phase 2 trial. And they only had 6 patients they could find with this particular cancer. It was a rare cancer. And they needed 34 for the phase 2 trial. And so we used AI and we were able to find, I think, 1,700 and something. So we got that phase 2 trial covered and phase 3 and so on. But if you're not using AI to find the patients and you can't find the patients, these clinical trials can last for a very long time just because they don't have enough patients to make it statistically significant to get through for safety. So the theory is economically, if we don't need to recruit as many patients, we can get through clinical trials a lot faster and a lot cheaper because, every patient is costing a lot for a pharma company to put through trials. You're paying the doctors to monitor, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if a lot of that is just simulation, then, you could get through a trial much faster in half the time because half of the cohort are digital. So that's interesting. A big thing. Cost saving and time saving.
That's interesting. I will ask now a very naive question, which I was asked by kids from the 5th grade of an international school.
Maybe I can't answer it. Let's see.
I'm sure you can. No, I was reading from the first Romy and Robbie book, and then one of the girls already knew she wanted to study medicine and become a doctor, but she wanted to study actually veterinary. And she asked me, well, can AI replace trials on animals? So
that's a very good question. I've been working with some animal health companies recently, and I have dug into that actually because I was asking them the same thing. Are you using digital twins in your trials? At the moment, they're not, the ones I've worked with, but they are all looking into it. So yes, theoretically, we will be able to do the same thing with animals as humans. And animals are very similar to humans. We've got the same diseases. We've got a lot of the same biology in many ways. So I can't see that there would be much difference.
And once again, forgive my ignorance, are there any drugs which, let's say, are based, so the findings are based only on animal studies without humans, or is it always with humans in the picture?
Always with humans in the picture. So there's animal studies first, which we're trying to get rid of completely with digital twins. Then there's always humans. It's an interesting question. I mean, part of me thinks we eventually will be able to replace humans fully. But then at the same time, you would need such strong data to be able to do that. And I think that it's a long way off at this stage, is my view.
And I wonder whether some technology giants might accumulate enough data to start building digital twins. What are your insights into those companies?
Well, I think they've got more data than pharma do in many cases, because they collaborate with many of the pharma and then they do their own thing. So they've probably got quite a lot of data. I wouldn't be surprised if they go into that, like we've already had Google Google parent company in, creating AlphaFold 3, which is protein folding. So, they're definitely in those spaces already.
But, DeepMind is a very good example. And DeepFold, of course, we had the Nobel Prize for chemistry for exactly the work done with AlphaFold. But on another end, there was another example in material science where they provided examples of new materials, and then a group of researchers tested this database, and they said, theoretically, those are nice guesses, but they're completely out of any practice because oxidation or the trial would cost so much money, it's not replicable on planet Earth. So how do you kind of evaluate the capabilities of those internet first, AI first companies in moving into the space?
It's an interesting area because you couldn't physically do it because of the computational power. So this is the big problem with really complex AI models. You need quantum computing, so quantum AI. So, but at the moment, however, now I'm going to go into what sounds like science fiction, but is fascinating me. I met someone, and he was on my podcast a few years ago. So he did medicine, then he did a PhD, and he was interested in growing human brain cells on computer chips and teaching them to do things. So he had, and I met him, this briefcase-sized box where these human biohybrid, whatever they're called, biocomputing chips lived. And he would pump in oxygen to them and nutrients, and through blood, there was blood going in. He had an artificial lung, artificial heart, just because obviously brain cells need to live. So he taught them to play games very successfully. Then one artifact that he discovered was that one human brain cell can power a computer. So now he's really reshaped the company because the CTO of Amazon flew to Australia where he is because they were thinking of powering their server farms on human brain cells because it's much more energy efficient. You don't need these supercomputers. And if one brain cell can do it, imagine a farm. And I was saying to him, the ethical questions I had, but imagine if, because they're human brain cells, if they kind of got awareness about what they were being farmed for. I mean, it's a fascinating area. But then I met this other guy, Francois Gand, and he has a company called Neuro in Canada. And so he was fascinating. I'm kind of thinking these two technologies should fit together. So his company, it all started, he was a data scientist, and he had this tragedy in his family where someone was paralyzed and couldn't communicate. And he really wanted to solve that problem. And so he created, you've obviously heard of Neuralink from Elon Musk. Well, he created something like that is like a headband that's plastic, that is non-invasive. And within an hour, patients who have not even eye movement can communicate. And it's amazing. So he said it's now being taken up with some of the US hospital chains like Cedars-Sinai, et cetera, who have bought it. But he said when they did the first clinical trials in real patients in hospitals, when it was first working, he said there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Like the doctors were in tears, he was in tears, his whole team were in tears. So they're doing really groundbreaking work in somehow with AI translating the electric energy, because we are literally just packets of energy, aren't we, when you think about it? You know, when I was doing neuroscience, we were measuring brainwaves, and most things, although in the early days it was like this part of the brain does this does this, but actually, and I think the first one where that was discovered was smell. You know, different smells are different patterns of waves of electrical energy across the brain. And now we realize that a lot of different things we do are literally just waves of energy across the brain. But he's somehow interpreting the patterns of those waves to mean something. And I keep thinking, can you imagine if one day, which doesn't seem so implausible to me anymore, although it does sound like science fiction, that these two technologies merged where we could actually have like a headband that conducted the electricity from our brain that could then power our digital twin. That's where I'm going with this.
That's gives Vivian Mink, so the mad scientist, definition of the cyborg, a very new connotation. I've just had her on my podcast, and she was talking about robot-proof people and kids.
I actually met her in Basel was it April? When I last saw you in Basel.
Fantastic.
She was there then.
No, she was gracious enough to actually record 2 episodes with me. And
Amazing.
we really talked about her work across multiple fields, which are not, let's say, that commercial.
Yeah.
And how she develops those fantastic models and equips people with those models to solve real problems. And sometimes those are problems of refugees or rare diseases. So someone like, let's say, Roche would not really attack because of the lack of, let's say, capital to get from when something like this gets deployed. And I was mesmerized by her perspective because she was using the word cyborg, which I know from science fiction as something scary and negative, in a very positive sense, as a human combo with AI.
Yeah, I wrote an article on that for LinkedIn about a year or two, maybe 2 years ago. Maybe I should put it back on LinkedIn again, because maybe people can't remember. But yes, there's 2 different terms, and that's one of them. And they both basically mean a combination, and there's different ways. So one is the cyborg, and the other one is augmenting in a different way. I'm going to put that article out again, actually.
Please do.
But yeah, no, it's a really, I think that's where we have to go. That's what I was arguing in that article. That's the future of humans and one of the things that I remember her saying earlier this year when she was at a conference I was at, is that when people are using LLMs all the time to do their work, instead of thinking, they have reduced gamma activity in the brain. However, what she's arguing for, this augmentation model, is basically improve it. We actually get better answers than the LLMs do when you've got the human and the LLM. And I'm just using LLM as an example. It could be another AI. But when we're working with the AI, we come up with actually a better answer than either of us on our own. It's very interesting. And I think that's where we have to go.
Absolutely. And this is actually democratizing the knowledge of AI to take the fear out of the equation. And frankly, using AI to cheat in exams, or even I can't really see, I always see AI-induced posts on LinkedIn. They look the same. There's this AI-ish type of a style of writing, and everything is like this median of writing, which takes out the voice, and voices are tremendously important. But this cyborg connotation, and you are talking about real brain cells powering an infrastructure. This is like next generation after next of neuromorphic computing. If we stay there and continue thinking, this digital twin technology and the compute and cost of compute. So you started mentioning quantum computing. In your eyes, what could be the architecture if those digital twins are to be deployed on scale?
Well, at the moment, it's very difficult to do it on scale because of the cost of the computing and the computing power that you need. So that's why I keep thinking the brain cell approach is kind of the future of where it could go. However, of course, as we know, computing, back in, I don't remember the year, but it was in the 70s, wasn't it? Bill Gates who said we wouldn't need more than so many kilobits ever in a computer or something like that. So computing power gets stronger and stronger and cheaper and cheaper. So yeah, but then we still have the challenge. We can model the heart, we can model the kidney, we can model these different things, but humans are this kind of interaction between, if you think about something like depression, it's not just a neurone problem, it's a neurone, immune, microbiome, endocrine problem. So, that's the challenge that we've got, is all of these. The modeling is just so complex. I mean, admittedly, I did have someone who's a biomechanical engineer who's working on it, who did say to me, we will all be able to have one within 10 years. I just find it, but then things are moving so fast, so I don't really know. But I do find it 10 years feels too soon.
Well, I would be very curious to understand, did digital twin open some doors to discoveries, not just, let's say, clinical trials on the existing pipelines, but did they open up something new? Because, listening to you talking about we are electrical beings, and I'm not a medical doctor, but let's say if we approach the medicine, not in a traditional sense of organ by organ, but if we start thinking about mitochondria and their role and microbiome in its role, health, I do not know whether things like digital twin might open up a window to a very new perspective on how should we teach medicine, approach medicine, study medicine, and maybe even approach the design of a pharmaceutical company.
I think it will. I totally agree. Because I remember reading something probably about 10 years ago now, where a woman was saying in this paper that it's going to get to the point that if you've got cancer and you go to a hospital and they say, okay, you've got breast cancer, she was saying you'll want to leave that hospital, because really there's so many types of cancer and it's not really by a body part. The same cancer can be in the breast and the kidney. It's all about the molecular pathway and the gene expression. And so the body part's kind of just a side effect of where it shows. It's just random, where it shows up. So calling things always breast cancer or this cancer or that cancer, I suspect will change as we get to understand more about what's going on in all these interactions. The challenge we have in pharmaceuticals is, people keep saying, why can't you cure cancer? Well, some cancers we can't say cured, we're not allowed to, but some biomarkers that have been discovered, like HER2 positive cancer, Roche did Herceptin for that, I don't know how long ago, 15, 20 years ago. I worked on it back in 2009, I think, and that was when it was already launched. But in the old days, if someone had an HER2 positive cancer, that was a death sentence. In these days, since Herceptin, and that was probably one of the most revolutionary drugs of its time, because it was one of the first that actually identified a gene biomarker for a cancer. Now we have others. There's others that have come out. And so that's something that every pharmaceutical company is working on, identifying the right biomarkers for the different cancers. And the challenge, that the lay people don't understand, is there's so many. How many genes do we have? And how many combinations? So it's a needle in a haystack. And the fact that we've actually got quite a few marked now, that actually we're not, as I keep saying, we're not allowed to say cured, but people who take that drug with that particular biomarker don't die yet. And the remission has gone on for well over a decade, 2 decades now. So, in my view, it's kind of cured. But, that's the challenge that we've got with all of this. But if we had a way to model, so we've got the genome, if we can somehow use AI and digital twins, and I think that AI is insufficient, though. I think we need physics. I think that's where people are going wrong with AI models. So if you think about clinical trials for drugs, AI, AlphaFold, all these models. Actually, have you heard of basefold?
Yes.
I love basefold. So basefold is similar to alphafold, but it's got 10,000 and it's 6 times more accurate. And that's so interesting because, the AlphaFold has only got the regular species that we use in pharma, but actually 10,000 species data gives you much stronger predictability in human trials, which is fascinating. But anyway, I'll go back to where I was. I go off on tangents, I'm sorry. So one thing I was thinking is at the moment, AI is really good at coming up with a new chemical entity for a condition. So it could say, okay, I really understand this disease now. So this is the molecules that are going to be most likely to work with this disease. And in phase 1 trials, that's pretty good. So we used to have something like 80, 90% failure rates there. With AI, that's brought that down to 40%. So that's huge. The challenge is it doesn't hold out for the rest of the trials yet. So phase 2 trials, I haven't got the real numbers off the top of my head, but say we're at 80% failure rate for phase 2 trials. We're still at 80% failure rate with the AI drugs. And there's been, something like close to 20 billion now that's been spent on AI in, drug discovery. And we don't actually have one drug that's come from that yet. So I feel that the real challenge we have is that AI is great at predicting patterns, but it's not taking into account the why. So we're missing the physics.
So are you talking about lack of world models implemented, embedded in AI? Because, we are talking about learning, reinforcement learning, which is model free and not model based. So model in this language is not the computational model, but the model of the world. And so there are some attempts to address the challenge. And, when I talk about responsible AI, I'm always speaking about making AI more intelligent, which is about introducing learning from counterfactuals and reasoning, introducing world models, and then introducing theory of mind. All of those properties are linked to the stages in evolution of biological intelligence. And of course, you can't just say it's one locus, let's say, of world models in brain. So there are several areas, but we could kind of, sense that, for example, cranial prefrontal cortex and theory of mind are tremendously connected. And there was a purpose behind evolving of the cranial prefrontal cortex. So is it this kind of, thing where you are heading into, and what might constitute the world model, or what you are calling physics in pharmaceutical domain?
We as humans are these very dynamic systems, whereas the models are not quite as dynamic as a human body. One single cell, I haven't got the numbers on me, but we've got like 90,000 processes in a single cell, and then they keep splitting. Let me think of a simple way to explain what I'm thinking. Let's think about a river, and you've got this river flowing, and you use AI to predict where it's going to flow. And so the AI will do a pretty good job. It'll go, yep, it's going to, and based on patterns, this is where it's going. But imagine the water is dynamic because we have things like gravity, we've got temperature fluctuations, we've got viscosity of water, we've got rocks in the way. And so if we were adding into our calculations of AI the laws of physics, the gravity, the temperature fluctuations, the viscosity of the water.
Earth magnetism.
And the Earth's magnetism, all of those things, then we would not only be able to predict like we could with AI, but we'd have why. And I feel that at the moment, I've written a white paper on this, but I haven't published it because I've really thought this through with drug development. I can see where I think things should go, and I've really thought it through, but there's a lot there that I'm still thinking about, that I'm actually thinking, well, should I start a company and do this? I can just see there's this gap for what people are doing now, which is really powerful and really interesting, but where it could be a lot more powerful because we'd know the why. Where I think AI in drug development is very strong and has been proven to be successful time and time again. A few things. One is, the first really good example is from COVID. So because we were in a rush in COVID to find treatments for COVID because people were dying, so we used AI to look at existing drugs that were FDA approved to say, out of these drugs that are already on the market, they've been through clinical trials, they're proven to be safe, are there any that are going to be efficacious against COVID? And so baricitinib came up as one, atazanavir is another, and there are a few. And so then clinical trials began on those drugs with COVID, and they were proven to be effective against COVID. And what was actually even more interesting is in combination, they had even higher efficacy. So we're quite good with AI at predicting other drugs that exist, what other uses we can have from them. And I think that's an under-leveraged part in pharmaceuticals. They could be making a lot more out of the drugs they've got because they could be finding that this drug, and often they find that, but it's by accident, like Viagra. It's a great example. That was for cardiovascular, and then they discovered that it had this side effect. And there's quite a few drugs like that where they've been researching it for one thing, but then they find this amazing, wonderful side effect that actually cures some other problem. And it's always been serendipitous in the past, but actually AI is amazing at reducing the serendipity and figuring out what's it going to do. And I think that's actually somewhere where we're not leveraging it enough in general, but particularly in rare disease. We've got something like 8,000 rare diseases. Wow. And of those, we've got about 100 that have a treatment. And, it's pretty poor because they're so rare, and it's hard because it's very hard to find the patients. You might have 30 patients in the world. I get a lot of parents reaching out to me asking about if there's any way to use AI to diagnose their children. It's heartbreaking. And if we could just leverage AI to really start to take all the drugs that are in existence now and all these 8,000 rare diseases that we've got a pretty good idea about and say, where are the matches? I think that would be such a powerful use of AI. And I think that would be a successful use of AI in drugs.
I can't agree more with you. And it's really inspirational what you are putting on the table here. And everything is already there. But a human being can't read through 35 million published articles in the medical library. AI, of course, can. But Andrée, you mentioned regulators and those drugs which have been already approved and could be now utilized for something else.
Yeah.
When we come back to digital twins, could you paint the regulatory landscape here? Yeah. And to my knowledge, US is much more, let's say, open to accept and to support trials like this. Could you describe why? Could you describe how they started, what is happening there, and then go into other geographies?
Yeah, okay.
And that was another episode of AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie. We have just crossed the first frontier of a very large conversation. In the last 47 minutes, Andrée has taken us from the concept of a digital twin, and most of us knew this concept from industrial settings, all the way to brain cells powering server farms, non-invasive headbands restoring speech to paralyzed patients, and the quiet revolution underway in clinical trials that is making drugs faster, cheaper, and in the cases of rare diseases, possible at all. There is a line that stayed with me from this conversation. Andrée said that AI alone is not enough, that we are missing the physics, that we are predicting where the river flows without understanding why it flows there at all. I think that is true of a lot of things right now when it comes to AI, not just drug development. And it is a thought worth sitting with all of us before we move into the second part of this conversation. And in part 2, we are going to shift from the labs and the industry to the regulatory development, from what the technology can do to who gets to decide how it is used and deployed and who cannot use it. We are going to look at the FDA in the United States, the European AI Act and GDPR, and what is happening in the UK post-Brexit, of course, China and Japan. We are going to talk about who owns a digital twin, who is liable when it goes wrong, and whether regulation is protecting patients or protecting bureaucratical institutions. We are also going to ask the bigger question: what does the world of medicine look like in our kids' lifetime? And what needs to change in education, in culture, in data ownership to get to this future? Goodbye for now, and I will see you next week.